Hi, my name is Margaret Kensinger, and this is my dad, Brett Kensinger, and I'm going to be asking him a few questions about authority. So, my first question that I have is, from where does the concept of authority come from?
Well, going back throughout the history of the world, the idea of authority has always been one that has come from the deity, whatever religion they believed in. They always believed that authority was derived authority from the God that they worshipped, and no less in the case with Israel, Old Covenant Israel, and you go back even further in the Old Testament, and you can see this in the beginning in Genesis. Let me give you an example before I go to Genesis. Here's an example. The ancient pagans used to believe that authority was derived from the god, the pagan god, and that everywhere they would put the statue of that god, the authority and even the presence of that god would be there in that statue. And everywhere that the king, a human king, would rule, who would worship that god, the authority of that god, the power of that god would be in that king. And so all the authority is derived. So the source of authority comes from God. Now, as Christians, we believe Scripture. We believe that we worship the one true God. But you have the same thing here. The difference is that the one true God gives and delegates authority to every human being made in his image, where all have dominion over his created order and in various capacities. And we'll get to this in a bit about including parents. Their parental authority is delegated by God as one of the manifestations or the expressions of that delegated authority from God. We go back to Genesis 1 for this in 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." There's the likeness. So we're different from the animals. We actually are more like God. And let them have dominion over, or let them rule over. That's what the word authority comes from. It comes from the old ancient words of Hebrew and later Greek of the word for power, having power. And yet it's also, what's mixed in there is the idea of having the right to have that power. So it's having power, but being authorized to have that power. And we get this from God himself. So he gives humans authority, or the right to exercise power over the created order. Now, we'll keep going a little bit more, because it says over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heaven and over the livestock and over the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." And so they have children, and they are to have authority over those children. But again, in case we parents get a little too prideful, that's delegated authority. And so with that comes a sense of our own responsibility to God, who is the source, the origin of our authority.
Who is the ultimate authority and why?
Well, I kind of anticipated some of that by saying, Margaret, that God, of course, is the ultimate authority. But you asked why, and that's a good second question there. The reason why God is the ultimate authority, and we would argue the God of Scripture, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God represented most excellently in his Son, Jesus Christ. The reason why he is the highest authority is by virtue of who he is as creator. And when you look at the Genesis account, what the writer of Genesis does is he merges the idea of creator and king together. And so what we're supposed to get, he does it many ways, we don't have time to go into it all, but what is supposed to be seen is that the creator has then the right to rule over all that he creates, and that is the one true God. That's Yahweh, and that And so you cannot separate the idea of creator and king. That is, with the authority to rule and the power to rule and the right to rule. And so by virtue of him being creator, who he is, really the foundation of all reality. Who else would it be?
My third question is, how do you behave in your parental position to make yourself a godly example of someone in authority?
Well, how I see authority from Scripture, it involves several components. Authority involves leadership. So you set the direction and the pace for the family as a parent. You show them the way and to go, and then that they're to follow. So direction, leadership, taking the initiative, direction, showing them the right way, and then at times, if they don't want to go the right way, discipline, but for their own good, right? For their children's good, to make sure they go the right way. And so those are three key points. I think that what my job is as a parent is to show the family that life was meant to be lived in accordance with the will of God. All life was to live on this earth according to the will of God. And so I want to direct them in that way. And that means we follow God's law. You go back to Israel, and Moses made the same charge to parents. Deuteronomy chapter 6, that famous section of what's known as the Shema, the great confession of monotheism from about God, the one God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today should be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign in your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. You see the responsibility of this delegated authority. The responsibility I have is to point my family in the right way, to live according to the law of God, so that we might live this life according to his will, that he be glorified in that. And so we have the same kind of thing in the New Testament. You can go to the Proverbs, as well. The Proverbs talk about how children are to consult their parents for wisdom, how the world really works. Listen to the parents. They'll tell you how the world works according to God's perspective and according to God's will. Well, coming from the Proverbs, you have Paul alluding to the Proverbs in this instruction in Ephesians chapter 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with the promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but rather bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And so a kind of new covenant version of Deuteronomy chapter 6 and the Shema. But now what is injected here is Christ, who fulfills the law. The best way I can behave as a parent and exercise my authority as a parent is to imitate Christ. So I want to teach them Christ's life. I want to teach them Christ's wisdom, the revelation that came through Jesus Christ, all that he is. However, I want to model that. The best way is to show them. There have been studies done for years that have shown that children who stay in the faith do so because of the chief influence of their parents. That's the number one reason. Godly parents who are passionate followers of Christ, that's the top reason why their children say why they were influenced to remain in the faith, from a human perspective. So that the best thing I can do them is to show them Christ, both in repeating again the law of God through Christ and his teachings, and then living that out.
My fourth question is, does God require a higher standard for you due to your parental position? Why or why not?
The answer, Margaret, is definitely yes. The scripture gives this principle in a number of contexts. Here's one that has come to mind. It was brought out in a parable that Jesus wrote about the wise steward or manager of the master's house. And at the end of that, the principle from the parable was that everyone to whom much is given, of him much will be required, and from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. And that is an underlying principle. You find that in the Proverbs, all through the Proverbs as well. When you have been given more will be required of you. And so we see this in terms of revelation. Paul gets at this in Romans 2 and 3. The Jews were given more revelation. More is expected of them because they had an advantage over the Gentiles. And so the same with parenting. I have been given this authority, this delegated authority to help promote God's social order, in moral and social order in the earth. That what comes with the power is the responsibility. So yes, I will be held accountable, especially I believe as a father and husband. Given that I have been given the authority of spiritual leadership in the home, I will answer to God more than I believe mom or the kids in what I did in the home. And so with this power comes greater responsibility and accountability. So definitely, yes.
My final question I have for you is, with your view of parental authority in mind, what would be a word of advice that you would give to other fellow parents?
Wow, I could answer this in a number of ways, but I'll spare you. Two things immediately come to mind. First, I would say, know how the evil one attacks. The evil one will attack us in our role as parents by trying, first of all, to reverse God's established created order. Go back to the fall. And in the fall, who does the evil one go after? He goes after the woman. Who was the one who was around before her? The man who had been given the prohibition of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil before the woman came around. And so what the evil one does is he reverses the created order of authority, God, man, and the woman, and he reverses it so that the woman influences the man to disobey God. And he'll do the same thing with children and parents. This is what I bring this one up because this is what we're facing in our society. The temptation to let our kids lead themselves, or to let our children find their own way. That's considered wise parenting today. You hear that from a lot of people, Dwayne Wade and his wife and others, just for example, the sports figures. Well, I just want to let my kid find their own way. As a good parent, I'm supposed to back off, let them discover it for themselves. I think they could not be more profoundly wrong in that. Your job is to have and exercise the authority, and don't let the evil one reverse that so where the parent is following the child. You have more life experience, and therefore you have a position to benefit the child. And don't give that away because of social pressure. Now, for the Christian parents, certainly, I guess I would say this: the best counsel I could give you is follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. What they need to see in your parental leadership is a leading Christian. Christian leadership means a leading Christian. And they want to see the reality of the life of Jesus Christ in you. They want to see the reality of the truth that Christ taught incarnate in you, lived out. Let them see your passion to be a disciple of Christ. let that be your what it characterizes your parental leadership. Christ came and exhibited God's rule, the way humans were supposed to, having dominion over the earth, being vice regents and having dominion over the earth. Christ came and did it. And now Christ is our King. And so let them see us worship our King and have a passion for being one of the new humanity in Jesus Christ. Let that be the top thing. Follow Jesus.
Well, thanks, Dad, for all your insight and time spent on this. I think it will help a lot of other parents, and if they see this, and it benefited me too. So, thanks.
You're welcome.
I believe that authority ultimately comes from God. As it says in Romans 13:1, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. God is where authority comes from. Beginning with creation, when God gave dominion and authority to Adam and Eve, God has given authority to other figures like teachers, parents, law enforcement, etc. However, they need to remember that they are not ultimately in charge. God gave them their authority, so that means that God has even greater authority than they do. Because he is the creator, Genesis 1:1, and king, Luke 22:29, of the universe, he has all the authority of the universe. I should probably
What's your favorite color? Red. No, blue. Ah!
I'm so bad at this. Oh.
It's from where does the concept of authority come?
Okay. Why did I choose to do a video? This is bad. My fourth video. Why or not? Why not? Oh my gosh, I can't talk.
I could.
That was like perfect timing. Okay.
David's got power in his finger.
Redo that. Alright, redo that.